I thought I was just attending a simple bridal boutique appointment with my future mother-in-law and her friends. I never expected to be ridiculed, mocked, and humiliated over my choice of wedding dress. But what these 5 elite blonde women didn't know was that my quiet fiancé held the power to destroy their perfect lives with a single phone call. Stay with me, because what happens next will show you that sometimes the most underestimated person in the room holds all the cards. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I've always been what people might call an ordinary girl. Growing up in the peaceful town of Riverside, where the biggest excitement was the weekly farmers market and everyone knew your business before you did, I learned early that kindness mattered more than appearance. My parents owned a modest flower shop, and I spent my childhood arranging bouquets and learning that beauty came in simple forms. After college, I became a librarian at our local library, a job that perfectly suited my quiet nature and love for books. 2 years ago, my entire world shifted when I met David at a community book reading event. He was sitting in the back row, listening intently to a local author discuss small business success stories. While everyone else asked questions about marketing and profit margins, David asked thoughtful questions about maintaining integrity while growing a company. There was something magnetic about his quiet confidence and the way he seemed genuinely interested in everyone's opinions, regardless of their background. After the event, we struck up a conversation over coffee at the small cafe next door. David told me he worked in business consulting, helping companies improve their operations. He seemed so grounded, so different from the flashy men I'd met before. He drove a modest sedan, dressed simply but well, and never talked about money or possessions. Our first date was a picnic in Riverside Park, where we spent hours talking about books, dreams, and our shared belief that success meant more than just financial gain. David proposed to me on the same park bench where we'd had our first real conversation. It was simple, romantic, and perfectly us. The ring wasn't enormous or flashy, but it was beautiful and chosen with such thoughtfulness that it brought tears to my eyes. He told me he wanted to build a life together based on love, respect, and shared values rather than material wealth. I couldn't have been happier. Planning our wedding was a dream come true, but also overwhelming. David insisted we could afford whatever I wanted, though he was always vague about his exact financial situation. I assumed he did well in consulting, but I never pushed for details. He seemed to prefer keeping work and personal life separate, which I respected. We were both private people who valued our simple life together. The first sign that David's world might be more complicated than I understood came when his mother, Eleanor, insisted on taking me dress shopping. Eleanor was elegant and sophisticated in a way that intimidated me slightly, but she'd always been kind during our brief meetings. She lived in the city, about 2 hours from Riverside, and moved in social circles that seemed far removed from my small-town life. When Eleanor called to suggest we spend a day at an exclusive bridal boutique in the city, I was both excited and nervous. She mentioned that some of her close friends would join us, women she described as sophisticated ladies who would help me find the perfect dress. The way she spoke about them made me feel like I was about to meet royalty, but also made me wonder if I'd measure up to their standards. The boutique, called Enchanted Elegance, was located in the most upscale shopping district I'd ever seen. The building itself looked like a palace, with floor-to-ceiling windows displaying wedding dresses that looked like they belonged in fairy tales. As I stood outside, smoothing my simple sundress and checking my appearance in the reflection, I felt a familiar flutter of nervousness. These weren't my usual surroundings, but Eleanor had specifically chosen this place, and I trusted her judgment. Inside, the boutique was even more impressive. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over displays of the most beautiful gowns I'd ever seen. Each dress seemed to tell its own story of elegance and romance. The sales associates moved with practiced grace, their own appearances so polished they could have been models themselves. I felt underdressed and out of place, but reminded myself that I was here as a valued customer, chosen by Eleanor herself. Eleanor arrived shortly after I did, looking stunning as always in a tailored cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She embraced me warmly, and for a moment my nerves settled. Behind her walked 5 women who took my breath away, but not necessarily in a good way. They were all blonde, all perfectly styled, and all wearing expressions that seemed to evaluate me before I'd even spoken a word. "Let me introduce you to my dearest friends," Eleanor said with obvious pride. This is Victoria Ashworth, president of the Metropolitan Women's Foundation. Victoria stepped forward with a smile that didn't quite reach her ice-blue eyes. She was tall, probably in her late 40s, with platinum blonde hair styled in a perfect chignon and wearing a black designer dress that screamed expense. "This is Penelope Hartwell," Eleanor continued, gesturing to a woman with honey blonde waves and a pearl necklace that caught the boutique lighting. Penelope owns several art galleries downtown and has an exquisite eye for beauty and style. Penelope's handshake was firm but brief, her gaze already moving to assess my outfit with obvious judgment. "And this is Genevieve Street Claire," Eleanor said, introducing a woman who looked like she'd stepped from the pages of a high-fashion magazine. Genevieve was perhaps the most striking of the group, with ash blonde hair that fell in perfect waves and wearing a white silk blouse that probably cost more than my car payment. She owns a chain of luxury spas and really understands what makes a woman feel beautiful and confident. The fourth woman was Arabella Thornfield, who Eleanor described as a successful interior designer whose work had been featured in architectural magazines. Arabella had a sharper look than the others, with platinum blonde hair cut in a severe bob and wearing a gray suit that looked both expensive and intimidating. Her handshake was quick and dismissive. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Finally, Eleanor introduced Cordelia Whitmore, a woman who seemed to radiate an air of superiority. Cordelia's blonde hair was styled in elaborate waves, and she wore more jewelry than seemed appropriate for a daytime shopping trip. Eleanor explained that Cordelia was married to a prominent businessman and was known for hosting the most exclusive social events in the city. As we settled into the boutique's luxurious consultation area, I tried to make conversation, asking about their various businesses and interests. Their responses were polite but cool, and I began to sense an undercurrent of judgment that made me increasingly uncomfortable. They seemed more interested in discussing people I'd never heard of and events I'd never been invited to than in getting to know me as David's fiancé. When the boutique manager, a sophisticated woman named Celeste, approached to begin our appointment, the atmosphere shifted. Celeste clearly recognized Eleanor and her friends, treating them with the deference reserved for very important customers. She explained that they'd prepared a selection of gowns based on Eleanor's description of what we were looking for, and led us to a private viewing area where dozens of stunning dresses awaited. The first dress Celeste showed me was breathtaking, a flowing creation with intricate beadwork and a train that seemed to go on forever. When I asked about the price, Celeste whispered a number that made my head spin. It cost more than I made in an entire year at the library. I tried to hide my shock, but Victoria noticed my reaction and exchanged a meaningful look with Penelope. "Perhaps we should look at something more, shall we say, budget-friendly," Victoria suggested with a smile that felt condescending. "I'm sure you have a more modest price range in mind." The way she said modest made it sound like a character flaw rather than a practical consideration. Eleanor quickly intervened, suggesting we look at a variety of options to see what styles I preferred before worrying about price. But the damage was done. The five women had clearly categorized me as someone who couldn't afford their level of luxury, and their entire demeanor shifted accordingly. As we moved through the boutique, looking at dress after dress, I noticed how the women's comments became increasingly pointed. When I admired a simpler gown with clean lines and minimal embellishment, Genevieve remarked that some people preferred understated looks when they couldn't carry off more dramatic styles. When I mentioned that I loved the romantic feel of a dress with flowing layers, Arabella observed that certain figures were better suited to more structured designs. Each comment felt like a small cut, designed to undermine my confidence while maintaining a veneer of helpfulness. Eleanor seemed oblivious to the undertone, focusing instead on helping me find options that might work well for our planned garden wedding in Riverside. But I was becoming increasingly aware that these women saw me as an outsider who didn't belong in their world. The turning point came when Celeste brought out a dress that made my heart skip a beat. It was ivory silk with delicate lace details, elegant but not ostentatious, romantic but not overly ornate. The moment I saw it, I knew it was the one. It represented everything I wanted for my wedding day. Simple beauty, timeless elegance, and the kind of classic style that would look just as beautiful in photographs 50 years from now. When I emerged from the fitting room wearing the dress, Eleanor's face lit up with genuine joy. "You look absolutely radiant," she said, and I could tell she meant it. The dress fit perfectly, The color complemented my skin tone, and for the first time all day, I felt truly beautiful and confident. But the 5 blonde women had a very different reaction. They exchanged glances that I was beginning to recognize as their signal for impending criticism. Victoria was the first to speak, her voice carefully modulated to sound helpful rather than harsh. "It's certainly," she paused, searching for the right word, "practical." The way she said practical made it sound like settling for less rather than making a smart choice. For a small-town wedding, I suppose it's perfectly adequate. Penelope nodded in agreement, adding that the dress had a certain simplicity that some people found appealing. "There's nothing wrong with choosing something safe and unremarkable," she said, though the word unremarkable stung more than she probably intended. Genevieve was more direct in her assessment. "Darling," she said, addressing me with fake sweetness, "you have to understand that when you marry into certain families, your wedding becomes a reflection of their social standing. This dress, while sweet, doesn't exactly make a statement about your place in David's world." I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and confusion. "What do you mean, David's world?" I asked, genuinely not understanding the implication. David and I shared the same values and lifestyle. We both preferred simple elegance over flashy displays of wealth. Arabella laughed, but it wasn't a kind sound. "Oh, honey, you really don't know, do you? David comes from one of the most prominent families in the state. The Whitfield name carries enormous weight in business and social circles. When you walk down that aisle, you'll be representing more than just your own taste." The Whitfield name hit me like a physical blow. Even in small-town Riverside, everyone knew about the Whitfield family. They owned a business empire that included everything from technology companies to real estate developments. They were regularly featured in business magazines and society pages. But David had never mentioned being connected to that family, and his last name was Richardson, not Whitfield. Cordelia seemed to read the confusion on my face and smiled with what looked like satisfaction. "You didn't know that David Whitfield Richardson is the heir to the Whitfield fortune, did you? His mother, Eleanor Whitfield Richardson, is one of the most influential women in the state, and you thought you were marrying some small-time business consultant." The room seemed to spin around me as the implications sank in. If what they were saying was true, then David had been hiding something enormous from me. But more immediately pressing was the realization that these women saw me as completely inadequate for the role they expected David's wife to fill. Victoria stood up and walked closer to where I stood in front of the mirror, still wearing the dress that had made me feel so beautiful just moments before. "Look at yourself, dear," she said, her voice taking on a tone of false sympathy. "Look at this plain, simple dress that screams small-town girl who doesn't understand the importance of making the right impression." "You're going to embarrass him," Penelope added, her voice becoming sharper. "Every time he has to introduce you at business functions or social events, people are going to wonder what he was thinking. You'll be a constant reminder that he settled for less than he deserved." Genevieve joined in, her critique becoming more personal. "It's not just the dress, though that's certainly problematic. It's everything about you. The way you speak, the way you carry yourself, your complete lack of sophistication. You're going to hold him back professionally and socially." Arabella was even more direct. "David needs a wife who can navigate his world with grace and authority. Someone who understands the importance of image and presentation. You, in that sad little dress, look like you're playing dress-up in someone else's life." Cordelia delivered what felt like the final blow. "The kindest thing you could do for David is walk away now, before you damage his reputation any further. Find someone more suitable to your station in life, and let David marry someone who can actually complement his success rather than diminish it." I stood there in that beautiful dress, surrounded by mirrors that reflected my humiliation from every angle and felt smaller than I ever had in my life. The dress that had made me feel like a princess now felt like a costume, and I like an imposter who had been caught pretending to be something I wasn't. Eleanor, who had been quiet during this brutal assessment, finally spoke up. "Now, ladies, I think you're being rather harsh. Emma is a lovely girl, and David clearly adores her." But even her defense felt half-hearted, as if she too had doubts about my suitability for her son. The 5 women had achieved their goal. They had taken my joy in finding the perfect dress and turned it into shame and self-doubt. They had made me question not just my fashion choices but my entire relationship with the man I loved. And they had done it all while maintaining the pretense of trying to help me understand my situation As I changed back into my simple sundress, I could hear them continuing their conversation in the main area of the boutique, their voices carrying clearly despite their apparent attempts at discretion. They were discussing how someone needed to help David understand the mistake he was making before it was too late. When I emerged from the fitting room, they were all seated together, looking like a panel of judges who had already reached their verdict. Eleanor approached me with what seemed like genuine concern, but I could see doubt in her eyes that hadn't been there when we started this shopping trip. "Emma, dear," she said gently, "perhaps we should think about this dress choice a bit more. There are so many other options that might be more appropriate for the kind of wedding David's family would expect." The way she said it made it clear that the decision was no longer entirely mine to make. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady, and told them I needed some time to consider my options. The 5 women said their goodbyes with the same false warmth they had shown all day, each offering to help me with future wedding preparations in voices that made it clear they hoped never to see me again. As I drove home to Riverside, my mind was reeling with everything that had happened. The beautiful dress that had made me feel so confident and happy was now a source of shame and doubt. The women's words echoed in my head, each cruel observation building on the last, until I felt completely overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I apparently didn't understand about my own fiancé and our upcoming marriage. But beneath the hurt and confusion, something else was beginning to stir. A quiet anger at being treated so dismissively, and a growing determination to understand the truth about David and his family. If he really was hiding something as significant as they claimed, I deserved to know the truth. And if he wasn't, then these women had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. The simple librarian from Riverside was about to discover that sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are setting themselves up for the biggest surprises. And sometimes, the quiet ones are the most dangerous when they finally decide to fight back. The drive back to Riverside felt like the longest 2 hours of my life. Every mile that passed gave me more time to process what had happened at the boutique, and with each passing minute, my emotions shifted from hurt to confusion to a growing sense of determination. The 5 blonde women had tried to break me down, to make me feel unworthy of the man I loved, but something deep inside me was refusing to accept their verdict. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I had made a decision. I needed answers from David, and I needed them tonight. If he really was hiding something as significant as being heir to the Whitfield fortune, then our entire relationship was built on a foundation I didn't understand. And if he wasn't, then I needed to know why his mother's friends felt so comfortable attacking me, based on assumptions about his background. David was in our small home office when I arrived, working on his laptop as he often did in the evenings. The sight of him there, looking so familiar and comfortable in our modest living room, made the women's claims seem even more surreal. This was the man who preferred homemade dinners to expensive restaurants, who drove a practical car instead of a luxury vehicle, who had proposed to me in a public park rather than some exclusive venue. But as I looked around our home with fresh eyes, I began to notice details that I had previously overlooked. The laptop he was using was top of the line, far more expensive than what a typical business consultant would need. The books on his shelves weren't just about general business practices, but about corporate leadership, international finance, and strategic management at levels that seemed far beyond small-town consulting. Even his clothes, which I had always thought of as simple and understated, were clearly high-quality pieces from brands I was only now beginning to recognize. David looked up as I entered the room, and his face immediately showed concern. "Emma, what's wrong? You look upset. Did something happen at the boutique with my mother?" His genuine worry for my well-being made my heart ache, because it reminded me of all the reasons I had fallen in love with him in the first place. I sat down across from him, still wearing the simple sundress that had felt so inadequate among the designer outfits at Enchanted Elegance. "David," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." His expression grew more serious, and he closed his laptop to give me his full attention. "Those women today, your mother's friends, they said some things that confused me. They talked about the Whitfield family, about you being David Whitfield Richardson, about your mother being Eleanor Whitfield Richardson. They made it sound like you're connected to some kind of business empire that I've never heard you mention." David's face went through a series of expressions that I had never seen before. First surprise, then something that looked like resignation, and finally a kind of sadness that made my chest tighten with worry. He was quiet for a long moment, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I recognized as his way of processing difficult situations. "Emma," he said finally, "there are things about my family and my background that I haven't told you. Not because I wanted to deceive you, but because I wanted us to build our relationship on who we are as people, not on what my family name might mean to others." His admission confirmed my worst fears and best hopes simultaneously. He had been hiding something significant, but his reasons seemed to come from a place of love rather than deception. "Tell me everything," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "I need to understand what I'm walking into, and I need to understand why those women felt justified in treating me the way they did today." David's eyes filled with a mixture of love and regret that made me want to comfort him even as I waited for him to explain himself. "You're right about the name," he began. "I am David Whitfield Richardson, and my mother is Eleanor Whitfield Richardson. The Richardson part comes from my father, but the Whitfield name comes from my mother's side of the family, and yes, it's connected to Whitfield Industries." His confirmation of what the women had told me should have made me angry, but instead, I felt a strange sense of relief that at least part of this puzzle was starting to make sense. Whitfield Industries isn't just a business, Emma. It's one of the largest privately held conglomerates in the country. We own technology companies, real estate developments, manufacturing facilities, and investment firms. The business was started by my great-grandfather and has been growing for 4 generations. When people hear the Whitfield name in certain circles, they think of power, influence, and enormous wealth. I stared at him, trying to process the magnitude of what he was telling me. "But David, if that's true, then why are we living like this? Why do you drive a regular car and work from a home office and shop at normal stores? Why did you tell me you were a business consultant instead of explaining that you're part of a business empire?" David stood up and began pacing, a habit I had noticed whenever he was working through complex problems. "Because, Emma, I've seen what that world does to people. I've watched my cousins and their spouses become shallow, competitive, and cruel. I've seen marriages destroyed by the pressure to maintain a certain image and social status. I've watched people I cared about become versions of themselves that I barely recognized." He stopped pacing and looked directly at me, his eyes intense with emotion. "When I met you, you fell in love with David the person, not David the heir to a fortune. You cared about my thoughts, my values, my dreams for the future. You never asked me what I could buy you or what doors I could open for you. You loved me for who I am, not what I have, and that was the most precious gift anyone had ever given me." His explanation was helping me understand his motivations, but it was also raising new questions about what our future would look like. "David," I said, choosing my words carefully, "I can understand wanting to build a relationship based on genuine connection rather than financial considerations. But what does this mean for our marriage? What does it mean for our life together? Are we going to keep living like this, or are there expectations from your family that I need to know about?" David sat back down, reaching across to take my hands in his. "That's exactly what I've been trying to figure out, Emma. I love our life the way it is. I love that we can be ourselves without worrying about impressing anyone or maintaining some kind of image. But I also know that eventually, especially after we're married, it's going to become harder to keep our 2 worlds separate." The way he said our 2 worlds made me realize how significant this divide really was. It wasn't just about money or social status. It was about 2 completely different ways of living and thinking about what mattered in life. And today I had gotten my first real taste of what his world expected from the woman who would bear the Whitfield name. "David," I said, still holding his hands, "those women today weren't just rude to me. They were cruel. They told me I was going to embarrass you, that I wasn't sophisticated enough for your world, that I should walk away from our relationship before I damaged your reputation. They took something that should have been a beautiful experience, finding my wedding dress, and turned it into a humiliation." David's expression darkened in a way I had never seen before. His jaw tightened, and I could see anger building in his eyes. "Tell me exactly what they said to you, Emma. Every word, every look, every gesture. I want to understand precisely how they treated my fiancé." The way he said my fiancé carried a weight of protectiveness that made me feel safer, even as I relived the painful experience. I told him everything. From Victoria's condescending assessment of the dress as merely practical, to Cordelia's suggestion that I should walk away from our relationship entirely. With each detail I shared, David's anger seemed to grow, but it was a controlled anger. The kind that suggested he was already formulating a response rather than just reacting emotionally. When I finished describing the afternoon, David was quiet for several minutes. Finally, he spoke, and his voice carried an authority I had never heard from him before. "Emma, those women made a critical error today. They assumed that because you come from a simple background and prefer modest choices, you must be weak and unworthy of respect. They couldn't see what I see every day. Your strength, your integrity, your genuine kindness, and your ability to make everyone around you better just by being yourself." "But David," I said, "what if they're right about some things? What if I really don't know how to navigate your world? What if I do embarrass you at business functions or social events?" The doubt in my voice surprised me, because I realized that despite my anger at how the women had treated me, part of me was worried that their assessment might be accurate. David moved from his chair to sit beside me on the couch, taking my face in his hands so that I had to look directly into his eyes. "Emma Richardson, you listen to me very carefully. You are the strongest, most genuine person I have ever known. You run a library that serves as the heart of your community. You organize literacy programs for adults who never had the chance to learn to read properly. You coordinate book drives for underprivileged children. You've built meaningful relationships with everyone, from small business owners to retired teachers, to young mothers who bring their children to story time." His words were helping to rebuild the confidence that the 5 women had systematically destroyed, but I could see that he had more to say. "You think you don't know how to handle my world, but Emma, you've been handling complex social situations and difficult personalities your entire adult life. The difference is that you've been doing it with genuine care for others rather than the calculated manipulation that passes for sophistication in my mother's social circle." "What are you saying, David?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand that this conversation was leading somewhere significant. "Are you saying you want to tell people the truth about your background? Are you ready to live openly as David Whitfield Richardson instead of hiding behind the consulting story?" David smiled, and for the first time since I had arrived home, he looked like the confident man I had fallen in love with. "Emma, I've been thinking about this decision for months. I was waiting until after our wedding to discuss it with you, but what happened today has forced the issue. I think it's time for me to take my place in the family business, and I want you by my side when I do it." The implications of what he was saying were enormous, and I needed to make sure I understood them completely. What does that mean exactly? What would change about our life, about our relationship, about our plans for the future? I was excited by the possibility of finally understanding this hidden part of David's life, but I was also nervous about what it might require from me. "It means," David said, "that I would join the executive leadership team at Whitfield Industries. It means we would move to the city, into a house that reflects our actual financial situation, rather than the modest lifestyle we've been maintaining. It means attending business functions, charity galas, and social events, where we'll interact with people from the world you got a taste of today. But most importantly," David continued, "it means that you would be introduced to everyone as Emma Richardson, the woman I chose to marry, because she represents everything I value most in life. It means that people like Victoria, Penelope, Genevieve, Arabella, and Cordelia would have to treat you with the respect you deserve, not because of what you can do for them, but because of who you are to me." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Part of me loved the thought of proving those women wrong, of showing them that the simple librarian they had dismissed so cruelly was actually stronger and more capable than they had imagined. But another part of me worried about losing the authentic life that David and I had built together. "David," I said, "if we do this, I want to make sure we do it for the right reasons. I don't want to change our lives just to prove a point to 5 shallow women who treated me badly. But if this is something you've been wanting to do anyway, something that would make you happy and fulfilled, then I want to support you." David's smile grew wider, and I could see the excitement building in his eyes. "Emma, I've been wanting to take a more active role in the family business for years. I have ideas about how we could use our resources to make a real difference in people's lives, how we could create programs that help small communities like Riverside thrive, rather than just making rich people richer. But I was afraid that getting involved would change who I am as a person. Now I realize that the change doesn't have to be about becoming someone different. It can be about bringing who I already am into a world that desperately needs more authenticity and genuine care for others. And having you beside me, with your natural ability to connect with people and your unwavering moral compass, would make me braver and better at everything I'm trying to accomplish. His vision of our future was starting to make sense to me, and I could feel my excitement growing to match his. But David, I said, those women are going to be part of your business world. Victoria, Penelope, Genevieve, Arabella, and Cordelia are all connected to your mother's social circle, which means they're probably connected to Whitfield Industries in some way. How do we handle that situation? David's expression grew more serious, and I could see that he had already been thinking about this challenge. You're absolutely right, Emma. All 5 of those women are married to men who have business relationships with Whitfield Industries. Victoria's husband runs our charitable foundation. Penelope's husband manages our art acquisitions and cultural investments. Genevieve's husband oversees our hospitality and luxury service divisions. Arabella's husband handles our real estate development projects. And Cordelia's husband is in charge of our high-end retail partnerships. That means, I said, understanding the implications, that when you take your position in the company, you'll essentially be their husband's boss. The 5 women who spent the afternoon telling me I wasn't good enough for your world will discover that their husbands' careers depend on maintaining a good relationship with the woman they tried to humiliate. Exactly, David said, and his smile had taken on a quality that I had never seen before. It wasn't cruel or vindictive, but it was definitely the smile of someone who had just realized he held all the cards in a game that others had been playing without understanding the rules. And Emma, when I introduce you as my wife and as the new Director of Community Outreach for Whitfield Industries, they're going to have to reconcile their assessment of you with the reality of your position and influence. Wait, I said, surprised by this new information. Director of Community Outreach? David, I never said I wanted a position in your family's company. I'm not sure I'm qualified for that kind of responsibility. The idea of going from small-town librarian to corporate executive felt overwhelming, even with David's support and encouragement. David took my hands again, his expression becoming gentle and reassuring. Emma, you've been doing community outreach your entire career. You've just been doing it in a library instead of a corporate setting. You understand what communities need to thrive. You know how to build programs that actually help people, and you have a natural ability to connect with individuals from all different backgrounds and circumstances. More importantly, David continued, you have something that most corporate executives lack: genuine integrity and a real desire to make life better for others rather than just advancing your own interests. Whitfield Industries has billions of dollars in resources that could be used to support education, small business development, and community infrastructure projects. But we need someone in charge of those initiatives who actually cares about outcomes rather than just public relations benefits. The more David explained his vision, the more excited I became about the possibilities. But I also wanted to make sure we were approaching this transition thoughtfully, rather than just reacting to what had happened at the boutique. David, if we're going to do this, we need to have a plan. We need to think about how we want to handle the revelation of your true identity, how we want to approach your new role in the company, and how we want to deal with people like those 5 women who clearly have their own agendas and prejudices. David nodded, his expression becoming more focused and strategic. You're absolutely right, Emma. This needs to be handled carefully and deliberately. The first step is for me to have a conversation with my mother about what happened today and about our decision to join the company. She needs to understand that her friends crossed a line, and she needs to know that we won't tolerate that kind of treatment in the future. The second step, David continued, is for me to meet with the current CEO, my Uncle Richard, to discuss the timeline for my transition into the company and the creation of your new position. We want to make sure that everything is properly structured and that we have the support we need to be successful in our new roles. And the third step, David said, his smile returning, is for us to attend the annual Whitfield Industries Charity Gala next month, as the newly engaged couple that we are. It will be the perfect opportunity to introduce you to the business community as my equal partner in both life and work, and to make it clear to everyone, including those 5 women, that you are not someone to be underestimated or dismissed. The charity gala idea both excited and terrified me, but I could see the wisdom in David's approach. Rather than trying to confront the women directly or seeking some kind of petty revenge, we would be taking the high road while simultaneously demonstrating that they had severely misjudged both my character and my position in David's life. David, I said, feeling a surge of determination that surprised me with its intensity. I want to do this. Not because I want to prove anything to those women, although I admit that will be satisfying, but because I want to build a life with you that reflects both of our values and allows us to make a real difference in the world. David's face lit up with joy and relief, and he pulled me into an embrace that felt like coming home and embarking on an adventure at the same time. Emma, he said, those women have no idea what they've unleashed. They thought they were dealing with a simple small-town girl who would be easily intimidated and dismissed. Instead, they've motivated the most determined and capable woman I know to step fully into her own power. And tomorrow, David continued, we're going back to that boutique, and you're going to try on that dress again. But this time, you're going to see it through the eyes of the woman you really are. Emma Richardson, soon to be Director of Community Outreach for Whitfield Industries, fiancé of David Whitfield Richardson, and someone who has every right to wear whatever makes her feel beautiful and confident. As we held each other in our modest living room, surrounded by the simple life we had built together, I felt a transformation beginning that went far beyond just understanding David's hidden background. The 5 blonde women who had tried to break my spirit had actually awakened something in me that I hadn't even known was there, a fierce determination to prove that true strength comes not from tearing others down, but from lifting yourself and others up. The simple librarian from Riverside was about to become someone that even she hadn't known she could be. And the 5 women who had underestimated her were about to learn that sometimes the quietest people make the loudest impact when they finally decide to speak up. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.